AFCEA, which is in Baltimore, Maryland. And we're very excited to have a CEO of a very well-known company called DarkLight. And I'm going to let him kind of introduce himself. Hi, John. How are you?
Good morning.
Anyway, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us here at AFCE 365. This is a very important cyber conference, as you know. And can you give us kind of our subscribers kind of a brief view of your background, please?
Sure. I'm the co-founder of DarkLight Cyber, and my background is I'm very much my specialty is taking technologies that and applying them to solving business problems. And one of the latest is taking this technology that actually originated in a national lab, but we've productized it, and now are offering it as a solution, our artificial intelligence expert system, specifically for solving problems in the cybersecurity space.
Well, you know, this is such a very important requirement today, as you know, security and networks, and especially for government and as well as, you know, private industry. You know, the Defense Department, of course, has a lot of human resource needs, and the big data processing realities make it very, very difficult to keep up, as you know. So my question is, how do you see the role of artificial intelligence, or what we refer to as AI, from the perspective of the warfighter's cyber security playing in the next 3 years? What's your projection there?
Well, I'd say it's actually become a requirement to have something that's going to augment the human intelligence.
Okay.
And so think of it from expert systems, machine learning. There's all sorts of different components of AI. And the requirement is there's just not enough people, and more importantly, there's not enough time to deal with all the information. And we use the term cybersecurity, but you think of it, it's actually physical and cybersecurity. At the end of the day, you're protecting something that is physical in nature, whether it's an asset, a person, an entity, anything. So there really isn't a barrier between physical and cyber. It's all intertwined. And at the end of the day, there's just not enough people to analyze all the information that's coming from all these different sources. So it's a requirement.
So you see this is going to be a big requirement in the next 3 years. This is an extremely important development in the industry.
I think what's occurring is the science of artificial intelligence has actually been around for a long time, in all its different forms. The reality is it hasn't been applied in this problem space as much. I mean, AI is commonplace in consumer type products. I mean, you talk about Siri and Amazon and all these things. It's common. It really has to. It's an absolute requirement to drive this technology into this problem space.
Okay, excellent. I don't know too much about artificial intelligence. I mean, I've had a chance of talking with a few people in this area, but in the cyber universe, is being used to identify threats, as you know, and assess the risk and orchestrate remediation. From a technical perspective, how does DarkLight meet all of these important challenges?
Like I mentioned, there's different forms of AI, and the way that DarkLight applies it is, think of it as being, and I'm not saying that it replaces a human, it actually can augment what a human does. And think of all the information that is given to a human analyst, and there's so many different security devices out there and sensors of every sort that are creating more and more data, and yet more information that the human has to analyze. They have to do sense making. They have to get the sensing information, so all the sensors out there, no matter what the source is. Then they have to make sense of it, so they have the sense making component. Then they have to make decisions based on all that information, and then they have to act upon it, so have a course of action.
Right.
That is all the things that have to be done. And what DarkLight's doing is augmenting the human, almost as a virtual analyst, augmenting all of those components and helping making it a fair fight, because right now it's not.
Well, it's so important, I think, not only for decision makers in government, but also, people who are on the field, in a kind of a combat situation as well, to be able to analyze, sensors and all the, data that's coming in, so they can make actionable, results have to come out of that. So I think what you said was really exciting and encouraging.
Thanks.
So can you give us, this is kind of where we talk about, features and benefits, but, just to talk about benefits of your patented, I know this is patented, correct?
Right, yes.
DarkLight at AI expert systems. So what's the 3 key benefits as you see?
Well, first of all, when I mentioned about all that information out there, there's the sensing and there's sense making, massive amounts of data. There might be a billion transactions occurring that have to be. That's all the sensing data, right? So it's pretty much impossible for a human to correlate it all and put it into the landscape of where they're operating, so the cyber landscape. And so the first thing you can do is actually make sense of all the raw data. Right? So it fuses all those sources. And puts it into a framework that is in the domain of the cyber analyst. So it's in the language that they speak. So that's the first thing, and that's kind of a breakthrough. There's part of the AI component, which is in the semantic web and so on. You've got the ontologies and so on. So that helps map it to an understandable place. Then the second thing is you need to actually capture that knowledge that the analysts have, and in a form that is understandable by other humans. So you need something that can actually not only be taught by a human, but to train the next person. And the problem that's occurred in this market, there's anywhere from 1 million to 2 million job openings for cybersecurity analysts.
Wow.
And that knowledge has to be captured so that when that analyst leaves that one entity, that knowledge about protecting that enterprise doesn't leave the door. So it actually is creating a knowledge base that becomes an asset for the company or the agency. So that's the second thing. And the third is kind of related to the first about fusing all that data.
Right.
Most of that data is being lost instantaneously from all these investments that have been made, from all these sensing devices and all these tools. DarkLight sits on top of all your existing investments. And if you're not looking at that data and dealing with it, then you're wasting your investment.
Right.
And so what DarkLight does is it allows you to get a better ROI on the security investments you make by making sense of all those sense-making inputs.
Well, I think that final point is really very powerful. And, we talk about return on investment, not only from, I think, a business perspective, but, also from government. They're looking for, as you know, the Department of Defense, they want to see ROI, then they're correct. So I think your point, all 3 points are really important, and the last one extremely powerful. So we'll kind of move on. Did you want to comment on something?
Well, I was just going to say the real issue, it's a reality, it's a workforce problem.
Right.
And back to your very first question about how would AI be applied, in essence, I think it's a complete fallacy to think that you're going to be able to train 2 million more cybersecurity analysts.
That's true.
Especially when it takes 17 months of on-the-job training for that one analyst that's hired to be able to be effective in that company,
right,
or in that entity. So it's interesting. This is more of a workforce and truly a knowledge-based problem. And that's how DarkLight is being applied. It's actually to augment that. So it's actually a workforce multiplier.
Well, there are a few other security analytics and orchestration tools in this market. Of course, not as great as yours, but what makes DarkLight kind of stand alone from, say, technical implementation perspective? How do you see that?
Well, it's interesting. I think the issue is that, yes, if you look at cybersecurity vendors, it's competitive, right? And a problem is everybody's using the same words.
Sure.
I would actually hate to be a buyer because everything has to be buzzword compliant. I mean, AI is a buzzword right now.
Right.
Right. And so what does that mean? And so, well, I'm going to explain to you at a technical level what the difference is.
Okay.
And the other solutions that are out there, they're not mutually exclusive. What you want to do is actually allow them to work together in a framework.
Right.
And one of the frameworks that's really being pushed, and we're a big provider or participant in, it's called the Integrated Adaptive Cyber Defense Framework that is being done at Johns Hopkins Advanced Physics Lab. They have this framework that really articulates the difference of the sensing, the sense-making, the decision-making, and the course of action. And mapping all the different vendors to that space so that it's truly plug and play. And so we are complying with that framework. And where we fit in that framework, as I mentioned earlier, is this sensing, which is all the data aggregation, the sense making, which is actually a reasoning component of how we're augmenting how the human reasons, the decision making, which is, okay, now that you're coming up to a point where you have to make a decision, that's where we really shine. And we approach it in a different way from all the other systems that we've seen. There's two different types of reasoning that a human does. There's inductive reasoning, which all the machine learning things, that's statistical. When you say, well, like, what's your risk scoring? Okay,
Sure.
That's all black box, but it can process massive amounts of data, which is actually a good thing for DarkLight. If you're doing that on the front end, the output of that system would then be an input into DarkLight. DarkLight is a deductive reasoning system. And what that means is, like, you have a hypothesis and you need to find all the data, the evidence to support that hypothesis. The other systems are presenting a hypothesis. This might be a problem. DarkLight approach is where the same way a human comes in is like, now give me all the evidence to confirm that hypothesis. At that point is when you decide what the course of action is. And you don't want to make a critical and sometimes life decision on whether to pull the trigger, so to speak.
Sure.
Right?
I understand.
And so you always want to have a human in the loop or on the loop of making that final decision. That requires deductive reasoning.
Right.
You're not going to say, oh, I'm 90% sure that this is a problem.
Right.
What if it's not? And your course of action causes a real problem.
Right.
So there's lots of systems, the orchestration systems and some of the other analytics tools that are very, very good at automating the ultimate course of action.
Right.
And although we can do that, there are systems out there that appear to be competitors of ours, but they're extremely complementary because they're much better at that last component.
Right.
We're best at sensing, sense making, and decision making, and then implementing the course of action.
I think you articulated that in a very powerful manner, and I appreciate that. If an analyst cannot really react quickly, I think you're kind of alluding to that, the network cybersecurity threat actionable results will be diminished, correct? And so how do you see improving the analyst enablement? I think you might have answered that question in the last one.
Well, I think what's going to happen is a lot of these new technologies, or actually not technologies, solutions, but it's using technology to solve the problem, are being applied to the cyberspace. Right now, we're so behind, meaning all that data, we're always finding out like 7 months after the fact that they've been in there.
Right.
We've got to make it fair. You've got to find out earlier in the kill chain of where things are occurring before they've actually committed the crime.
Right.
It's more, it's like there is a potential crime in process.
Right.
Find that evidence. That's all. That sensing information, and say, wait, let's stop it before they finish.
Right.
Right. So I think all these new technologies, including ours, are going to make it more of a fair fight. Catch it earlier in the kill chain.
Right.
Okay? Until we do that, until you apply these different solutions in that way, we're going to be 7 months behind on average. That's not acceptable. So I think all these different approaches like ours are going to make shrink that timeline and be more of a active cyber defense as opposed to always being reactive and 7 months behind.
Well, and of course in our world, where there's many agencies and companies. They've lacked resources. I think you began to talk about probably an important issue, which is STEM, of course, and so forth. But so even there's too few experienced analysts. I think you already alluded to it. Can you tell us how, say, an organization or agencies can improve their cyber defense response times in this new world?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's back to it's still a people problem.
Yeah. Okay.
And some of it is just pure cyber hygiene, meaning the organizations just have to be aware and train all of their employees that it's actually what the human does at the receiving end that's causing most of the problem. I mean, there's this whole thing with ransomware and phishing. It's like,
Right.
I probably get 5 or 6 phishing attempts per day, right? And when you want to dig into it, like, it's from a rather interesting sources, right?
Right.
But I know not to click on it.
Sure.
Right? Now go to, we're looking at a bunch of companies out here, there's probably 1,000 companies in all these buildings out here.
Sure.
And how many people, even at that level, realize just don't do that?
Right. Not many.
No, and it's so that's one of the things. So it's the training and just being more aware that we're all exposed. Right? In reality, that's going to solve most of the problem. But then on the flip side, you have to have sophisticated solutions like ours that are going to act and react to the very sophisticated attack patterns, because they're going to get better and better and better. And you're not going to solve it with just the people, the cyber analysts. What you need to do is make them super analysts, so to speak. And that's where, like with our system, it's basically, it's taking all the mundane reasoning process and helping augment and automate a lot of things I know how to do, but there's no way I can deal with 4 billion transactions in my brain. But I can automate that.
Sure.
And so that allows me to move up to a higher level of cognitive thinking. So then I get better.
Right.
It's like, right now it's like cyber analysts, it's like they're the only ones without an Excel spreadsheet and a calculator.
Right.
Right? It's as simple as that.
Right.
So these tools will bring it up to, it's like, okay, now you're not the only kid in the class with Excel.
Right.
Right? Automate and write all those macros, do that reasoning process, do cognitive thinking, which is now technically possible, and then allow the analysts that you do have to make it look like those 5 analysts are now doing the work of 500. That's technically possible.
Well, you've got me, excited here because, it's really clear that you have a great passion in this area. And of course, we're kind of getting down to the point where I kind of ask you the question if you have any further comments. But before you do that, maybe you can tell our subscribers a little bit about yourself. You can take a look over at the camera and talk to them if you wish about yourself.
Sure. My background is I'm an entrepreneur, but more on the technical side, and I've invented things. I'm passionate about solving problems, especially when people say they can't be solved. The last company I started was called PowerCast, and what we figured out was how to actually harvest the energy in a radio wave and charge capacitors and batteries. And we were way ahead of our time, but now the time is where down, well, what can I power with those things? And that was one of those cases where using the local radio stations and TV stations as the power sources, and now we can power sensors. And so it's that kind of thing. It's like you solve a problem that they say can't be solved. So it's very inquisitive. So I like to do that. So and my role at when I was at Pepperdine, the Grazie Dio School of Business and Management, I was hired there to help the business students that would identify a business problem to help find the technology that could potentially help solve that problem. So it was business problems looking for a technology as opposed to technology looking for a problem.
Wow.
And so that was my role, and that's kind of what I do.
Wow. So you want to say a little bit in summary about DarkLight? Anything we missed?
I think we covered a lot of it, but I think the main thing here is like it really is a tool that can be used to both be a force multiplier by creating this entire knowledge base. It's an expert system in the cyber domain. I believe it's the first one that is curated as much knowledge and expert system data out of there from public and some private sources. That once it's applied, it truly is going to be one of those, it's a cliche, but it's going to be one of those game changers. And hopefully there will be other companies that follow in this suit that actually apply these certain technologies to solve this problem, because this is not just a business problem, it's a national security problem. And so you really have to bring this to bear. And we're just coming out of the point where we have the industrial strength version that's in beta right now. We have been applied where we've actually solved lots of business problems with how many analysts that one account had, and they were losing the analyst, and we created virtual analysts so that. And so we know it works, and I'm excited to get it out into the market.
Well, John, I tell you, this has really been enlightening for me, and I'm sure other people who will see this video. So for GMCstream TV, thank you very much, John Shearer, CEO of DarkLight, for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Very much. Thank you.